The sound of my heels echoed through the Portland Federal Courthouse like gunshots in a cathedral. Each step closer to that mahogany door made my heart pound harder. But not from fear. Not anymore. The fear had died 3 years ago when they stripped everything from me. What replaced it was something far more dangerous: certainty. I knew the truth, and I had the evidence to prove it. I pushed open the heavy door, and the air inside hit me like a wall. Cold. Sterile. Thick with tension and expensive cologne. My eyes swept the room, taking in the faces I once called family. Victor sat at the defense table, his silver hair perfectly coiffed despite the circumstances, his jaw tight with barely suppressed fury. Beside him, Vivienne wore her signature pearls and that frozen smile she reserved for charity galas and courtroom appearances. Julian lounged in his chair with calculated indifference. Scrolling through his phone like this was just another inconvenience in his privileged life. Their lawyer, Richards, a man who probably billed more per hour than most people earned in a week, looked up from his documents. His eyes met mine, cold and dismissive. He leaned back in his chair with that smirk I had seen before, the one that said I was nothing more than a nuisance to be swatted away. "Welcome back, traiteur," he said, loud enough for the room to hear, but quiet enough to avoid the judge's reprimand. I walked to my seat beside Amelia Hayes. My attorney, and the only person in this building who had believed me from the start. I didn't look at Richards. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned to face my family directly, meeting their eyes one by one. "I'm only here to take back what's mine," I said, my voice steady and cold as winter steel. Vivienne let out a small, tinkling laugh, the kind that sounded charming at cocktail parties but cut like glass up close. Julian didn't even look up from his phone. Victor's gaze held that familiar disappointment I had seen my entire life. The look that said I would never be enough. Never be worthy of the Vance name. But here's the thing about that look. It used to destroy me. It used to make me question everything about myself. Make me wonder if maybe they were right. If maybe I was the problem. Today, sitting in that courtroom with a folder full of evidence and 3 years of hard-won peace, that look didn't touch me. Instead, it fueled something else entirely. It reminded me exactly why I was here. Before I continue with how we got to this moment, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been treated like you don't matter by the people who should love you most? Have you ever sacrificed everything only to be called ungrateful? If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means everything, and I read every single comment. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, because you need to understand how a family could fall so far, and how I found the strength to rise. 3 years earlier, I sat in a different room in the Vance family estate, the sprawling mansion overlooking the Willamette Valley that my grandfather Arthur had built from nothing. The chandelier above the dining table cost more than most cars, each crystal catching the light and throwing rainbow prisms across the walls. I had grown up in this house, walked these floors, memorized every painting and every piece of furniture, but I had never felt like I belonged here. Arthur Vance was a legend in Oregon real estate. He had started with a single property in the 1,960 seconds and built an empire worth over $8 million. 12 commercial properties, 3 lakefront estates, and a legacy that bore his name in plaques across Portland. He was stern, demanding, and absolutely brilliant. He was also the only person in my family who ever truly saw me. I remember the last real conversation we had before he died in 2004. I was 14, sitting in his study while he worked on papers. I didn't understand yet. He looked up at me over his reading glasses, those sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Eleanor," he said, "you've got something the rest of them don't. You've got integrity. You see the numbers not for what they can buy you, but for what they mean. Remember that." I didn't know then that those words would become my lifeline. After he died, my father Victor took control of the company. My mother Vivienne became Portland's darling philanthropist, gracing every charity board with her presence and her checkbook. My younger brother Julian was groomed to be the golden heir, the one who would carry the Vance name into the next generation. And me, I was tolerated. I was the daughter who worked too hard, who asked too many questions, who didn't understand that women in the Vance family were meant to smile and look pretty at fundraisers, not pore over financial statements at midnight. But I did understand the numbers. By the time I was 25, I had my MBA from Willamette University and was working officially for Vance Holdings. Officially, I was a junior analyst. Unofficially, I was the person who caught the discrepancies no one else saw, who flagged the properties that were bleeding money, who restructured the portfolio when my father's attention wandered to his next business venture. In 2016, everything came crashing down. The market shifted. Several major tenants defaulted, and suddenly Vance Holdings was hemorrhaging cash. I watched my father spiral. He stopped coming to the office. He drank more. He snapped at everyone and made increasingly erratic decisions. Vivienne was no help. She was too busy maintaining her social calendar to notice the empire was crumbling. So I did what I always did. I fixed it. I worked 18-hour days for 9 months straight. I renegotiated contracts, found new tenants, restructured our debt, and personally guaranteed loans with my own money. I poured my entire savings, $520,000 that I had carefully built over years of frugal living and smart investments, into keeping the company afloat. I didn't ask for recognition. I didn't ask for thanks. I just did it because it was my family. And I believed that family meant something. By Christmas of 2016, we were stable again. The properties were producing income. The debt was manageable. And the company had a future. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally drained, but proud. I had saved my grandfather's legacy. 2 weeks later, my parents called me into the dining room. Same chandelier. Same expensive table. Same house that had never quite felt like home. I thought they were going to thank me. Maybe acknowledge what I had done. Maybe even apologize for Victor's behavior during the crisis. Instead, Vivienne slid a folder across the polished wood toward me. Her manicured nails tapped the leather surface twice. A dismissive gesture I knew all too well. "What's this?" I asked, my stomach already beginning to sink. "Your termination papers," Victor said, not meeting my eyes. Effective immediately. The words didn't make sense at first. I heard them, but my brain rejected them as impossible. I had just saved this company. I had given everything. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding small in that cavernous room. "You overstepped," Victor said, finally looking at me with those cold eyes. "You made decisions without authorization. You manipulated financial records. You exceeded your authority. I saved the company." The words burst out of me. Too loud. Too disparity. "I put in my own money. I worked every single day while you were." "Exactly," Vivienne interrupted, her voice smooth as poisoned honey. "You put in your money without permission. You acted like you owned the company. You don't, Eleanor. You never have. You never will." She leaned forward then, and her next words branded themselves into my soul, words I would hear in my head for years to come. "You were born to follow, Eleanor dear. Some people simply have to accept their place." I stood there, frozen, as the full weight of it crashed over me. They weren't firing me because I had done something wrong. They were firing me because I had done everything right, and they couldn't stand it. I had proved I was capable, maybe more capable than any of them, and that threatened the natural order of their world. I was supposed to be grateful for scraps, not sit at the table. I looked at Julian, hoping for some sign of protest, some indication that this was as insane to him as it was to me. He was examining his fingernails, bored by the whole scene. I stood up slowly, gathering what remained of my dignity. I picked up the folder with my termination papers, along with another folder I had brought containing detailed records of every contribution I had made to the company. Every loan, every restructured contract, every saved property. I had documented everything because that's who I was. Meticulous, thorough, prepared. I didn't say a word. Not one single word. I just walked toward the door, my footsteps echoing in that terrible silence. Behind me, I heard Vivienne sigh with satisfaction, as if she had just completed an unpleasant but necessary task. Like firing incompetent help, the heavy front door closed behind me with a soft thud that felt like the end of everything. I stood on the stone steps of the Vance mansion, looking out at the perfectly manicured grounds, the imported trees, the fountain that cost more than most people's houses, all of it built on my grandfather's vision and my uncredited work, and none of it would ever be mine. I got in my car, drove to my apartment, and didn't cry. I was too numb for tears. That would come later, in waves that felt like drowning. For now, I just sat in the dark and wondered how everything I had worked for could disappear in a single conversation. The next 3 years were a study in survival. I had to rebuild everything from nothing. The money I had poured into saving Vance Holdings was gone. My job was gone. My family had made it clear through their silence that I was no longer welcome at holidays or family events. I was erased from the Vance legacy as if I had never existed. I moved to a small studio apartment in southeast Portland, the kind of place with thin walls and neighbors whose lives you knew too intimately. I took freelance consulting work, analyzing portfolios for small firms that couldn't afford big agencies. It was honest work, and I was good at it, but it wasn't the same as what I had lost. Not the money or the prestige. The purpose. The connection to my grandfather's legacy. I kept telling myself I was moving on, building something new, but the truth was simpler and more painful. I was grieving. Not just for what they had taken, but for what I had finally understood they had never intended to give me in the first place. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, everything changed. I came home from a coffee shop meeting with a potential client to find a package sitting outside my apartment door. No return address. No markings except my name written in an elegant script on expensive paper. The kind you had to order from specialty shops. Inside was a letter. And the moment I saw the handwriting, my heart stopped. It was my grandfather's handwriting, distinctive and unmistakable. The same careful script I had seen on birthday cards and Christmas notes throughout my childhood. The letter was sealed in an envelope with just 4 words written on it. For Eleanor Vance only. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single page that would change everything. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and something has gone very wrong with my wishes. I had hoped it would never come to this. But I am a practical man and I know my son better than I want to admit. This letter is being held by someone I trust, with instructions to deliver it to you if certain conditions are met. Inside the second envelope, you will find what you need. Trust your instincts. Trust the truth. And most importantly, trust yourself. You are stronger than they ever let you believe. With all my love, Grandfather Arthur. The second envelope contained something that made my blood run cold. It was a will, handwritten, dated June 14, 2004, just 2 months before my grandfather died. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. In clear, unambiguous language, Arthur Vance left everything to me. Not the family trust. Not divided among his children. Everything. The company. The properties. The lakefront estates. All of it. To Eleanor Ann Vance. In recognition of her understanding of his vision and her integrity in business, but that wasn't the will that had gone through probate. The official will, the one filed with the court and executed by the family lawyers, divided everything among Victor and a small trust for his grandchildren. I had received nothing from that will except a brief mention and a token amount that my father had never actually given me. I sat on my apartment floor, surrounded by documents, and realized what I was holding. Evidence of fraud. Evidence that my family had stolen not just my job and my dignity, but my grandfather's final wishes. I wanted to march into their house that very night and throw it in their faces. I wanted to scream and rage and demand justice. But something my grandfather had taught me stopped me. He always said that anger without strategy is just noise. If I was going to do this, I had to do it right. I spent the next week researching everything I could about inheritance law, will challenges, and statute of limitations. The news was bad. In Oregon, you generally had to challenge a will within a few years of probate. My grandfather had died in 2004. It was now 2019. 15 years too late. Unless you could prove fraud. If you could prove the will had been forged or obtained through undue influence, the clock started over from when you discovered the fraud. Not from when it occurred. I had discovered it 6 days ago. The clock had just started, but discovery wasn't enough. I needed more evidence. I needed to prove that the probated will was fake and that my version was real. I needed experts, witnesses, documentation. Most of all, I needed a lawyer who would believe me. That's when I remembered David Thorne. David had been my grandfather's personal attorney for years before mysteriously leaving the practice in 2004. I had been too young to understand the significance at the time, but now his sudden departure seemed suspicious. I spent 2 days tracking him down, finally finding a phone number for a David Thorne living in Bend, about 200 miles away. When I called, there was a long silence after I introduced myself. Eleanor Vance, he finally said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite identify. Regret relief. I wondered if you would ever find me. You knew, I said. And it wasn't a question. I knew, he confirmed. I knew what they did. And I've spent 15 years being a coward about it. Can you meet me? There are things I need to tell you in person. 3 days later, I drove to Bend and met David at a coffee shop overlooking the Deschutes River. He was older than I remembered, grayer and more weathered, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He was carrying a briefcase that looked like it had been waiting a long time to be opened. I should have come forward years ago, he said without preamble. Your grandfather was a good man, and what they did to him. To you. It haunts me, but I was scared. They have power and money and connections, and I had a family to protect. What exactly did they do? I asked. Though I already suspected I knew, David pulled out a file. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen. Letters from my grandfather to David, expressing concern about Victor's intentions. Notes from meetings where Victor had pressured Arthur to change his will. And most damning of all, a detailed memo from David to the firm's senior partners, dated August 2004, outlining his concerns about a will that had been filed for probate without his knowledge or approval. The will they filed wasn't written by me, David said, his voice tight with old anger. I drafted Arthur's will in June 2004. Exactly as you described. Everything to you. With specific provisions about maintaining the properties and continuing his philanthropic work. That was his wish. Clear and unambiguous. Then how? Your father hired another lawyer, David interrupted. Someone less principled. Someone willing to forge Arthur's signature and backdate a new will. They used a signature from a property document from 1998, scanned it, and placed it on the forged will. The handwriting was close enough that no one questioned it. Why would they? The family was grief-stricken. Everything seemed in order. And I had conveniently disappeared. Why did you disappear? David's jaw tightened. Because they made it clear what would happen if I didn't. I received threats. My daughter received threats. I was told in very explicit terms that if I challenged the will or spoke about what I knew, my family would pay the price. So I took a settlement, signed an NDA, and moved away. I told myself I was protecting my daughter. But the truth is, I was a coward. You're here now, I said quietly. I'm here now, he agreed. And I'm willing to testify. More than that, I have evidence. He pulled out a USB drive. I kept copies of everything. All my communications with Arthur. All the drafts of the real will. And most importantly, a recording. A recording. Your grandfather was thorough, David said. After our last meeting, when he expressed concern about Victor's pressure, he recorded a statement. A clear, unambiguous declaration of his wishes. He wanted to make sure there could be no doubt if anything happened to him. He gave me that recording and made me promise to keep it safe. I've kept it safe for 15 years. Waiting for the right moment. I think that moment is now. We sat in that coffee shop for 4 hours while David walked me through everything he knew. The forged will. The lawyer who had been paid off and had subsequently disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The intimidation tactics. The network of people who had been either bought or scared into silence by the time I drove back to Portland. I had a roadmap. I also had a safety deposit box key that David had given me, containing original documents that he had kept as insurance all these years. The next step was finding a lawyer brave enough and skilled enough to take on the Vance family. That led me to Amelia Hayes, a prosecutor who had recently left the district attorney's office to start her own practice specializing in elder law and estate litigation. She had a reputation for being fearless and meticulous. Exactly what I needed. I called her office and left a message. She called back within an hour. "I've heard about your family," she said. After I explained the basics. High profile. Well connected. Generous donors to several judges' campaigns. "This won't be easy." "I'm not looking for easy," I said. "I'm looking for possible." "Then let's meet." Amelia's office was in an old converted warehouse in the Pearl District. All exposed brick and modern furniture that somehow managed to feel both professional and rebellious. She was in her late 40s. With iron gray hair she wore in a no-nonsense cut and eyes that seemed to calculate risks and probabilities in real time. I laid out everything. The original will. David's testimony. The forged signature. The recorded statement from Arthur. The timeline of events. I spoke for 2 hours without interruption, while Amelia took notes in a leather journal. When I finished, she sat back and studied me with an intensity that made me want to squirm. "This is going to destroy your family," she finally said. "If we pursue this, if we prove fraud, there will be criminal charges. Your father could go to prison. Your mother could face charges as an accessory. Your brother's reputation will be ruined. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about the last 3 years. The studio apartment, the freelance work that barely paid the bills, the holidays spent alone, the way Vivienne had smiled when she told me I was born to follow, the way Julian had looked at his fingernails while they fired me, the way Victor had let me pour my life savings into saving his company and then discarded me like trash. They already destroyed our family. I said, "I'm just making it visible." Amelia smiled. A sharp, satisfied expression. "Then let's get to work." The first thing we did was secure and verify the evidence. The USB drive David had given me contained not just documents but audio files, including Arthur's statement. Hearing my grandfather's voice again after 15 years brought tears to my eyes, but they were tears of determination. Not sadness. "This recording confirms my wishes," Arthur's voice said, strong and clear despite his illness. "In the event of my passing, all assets of Vance Estates shall pass to my granddaughter, Elena N. Vance. She alone has demonstrated the integrity and vision to continue what I have built." We hired a forensic document examiner who confirmed that the signature on the probated will was forged. We tracked down Agnes Whitmore, the housekeeper who had worked for Arthur for 20 years, who confirmed she had witnessed him signing the real will in June 2004. We found financial records showing suspicious payments to the lawyer who had prepared the fake will, followed by that lawyer's convenient disappearance in 2005. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. The Vance family had committed fraud to steal my inheritance. As we built our case, strange things started happening. My apartment was broken into, though nothing valuable was taken. Just my laptop, smashed to pieces on the floor with a note written in a cramped hand that was meant to look like my grandfather's writing. "Legacy is not inherited. It is earned." It was a threat and a warning. A message that they knew what I was doing and they wanted me to stop. But they had made a critical mistake. By threatening me, they showed they were scared. And if they were scared, it meant we were on the right track. I called Amelia immediately. She came to my apartment with a police officer and a crime scene photographer. We documented everything. The broken laptop, the note, the Jimmy marks on the door that suggested professional breaking and entering. "They're getting desperate," Amelia said, examining the note. "That's good for us. Desperate people make mistakes." A week later, I received a phone call from Julian. It was the first time we had spoken in 3 years. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with that familiar condescension. "I heard you've been making trouble. Talking to lawyers. Digging up old documents. You need to stop." "Why?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Because you're embarrassing the family," he said. "Mother has been removed from 2 charity boards because of rumors you're spreading. Father is being investigated by financial regulators. This is damaging the Vance name." "The Vance name," I repeated. "Is that what you're worried about? Not the truth, not justice, just the name." "The name is everything," Julian said, and he sounded like he genuinely believed it. "Without the name, without the reputation, we're nothing. You used to understand that. I understand it better now than I ever did." I said, "I understand that you value the illusion of the name more than the integrity it was supposed to represent. Grandfather would be ashamed of all of you. There was a pause, and when Julian spoke again, his voice was harder. Stop this before it gets worse. You can't win, Eleanor. We have resources you can't imagine. Lovers. Connections. Judges who owe us favors. All you have is some old documents and a bitter grudge. I have the truth, I said. That's more than any of you have. The truth. Julian laughed. Bitter and ugly. The truth is, whatever can be proven in court, and courts favor people like us. Stop now. Take whatever settlement Father is willing to offer, and rebuild your life. Keep pushing, and you'll end up with nothing. I already have nothing, I said. You made sure of that 3 years ago, so I have nothing to lose. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From anger, yes, but also from something else. Clarity. Purpose. For the first time in 3 years, I knew exactly what I was fighting for and why it mattered. The threats continued. My landlord received a call suggesting I was a troublesome tenant. The gallery where I had been selling some of my photography work suddenly decided to review our consignment agreement. David was followed on multiple occasions by private investigators who weren't particularly subtle about their surveillance. Someone even tried to bribe him, offering him $200,000 to recant his testimony. David called me immediately. They offered me money to say I was wrong about the will, he said. I recorded the whole conversation. Of course you did, I said, feeling a surge of gratitude for this man. I barely knew who was risking everything to help me. They're scared. Eleanor, David said. Really scared. Which means they know we have them. Amelia agreed. They're showing their hand. Every threat, every bribe attempt, every act of intimidation is evidence of consciousness, of guilt. They're building our case for us. 6 weeks after we filed our initial notice of intent to challenge the will, Victor called me. Not Julian this time. My father, the man who had fired me and erased me from the family, was on the phone, asking to meet. Somewhere neutral, he said. No lawyers, just family. Against Amelia's advice, but with her blessing. I agreed. We met at the Langford Lodge, one of the family properties near Crystal Lake. It was a beautiful place. The kind of location magazines photographed for luxury travel features. I had spent summers here as a child, swimming in the lake and learning to fish from the dock. Coming back felt like entering a museum of my own past. Victor was there with Vivienne. Julian was notably absent. My father looked older than I remembered, grayer and thinner, but his eyes still held that same judgmental distance. Eleanor, Vivienne said with false warmth, as if we were reuniting after a pleasant separation rather than 3 years of mutual exile. You look well. Cut the pleasantries, I said, sitting across from them at the massive dining table. Why did you want to meet? Victor slid a folder across the table. An echo of the termination papers 3 years ago. This is a settlement offer. A trust fund of $1.2 million. Managed by an independent trustee. Quarterly distributions. You'll never have to work again if you live sensibly. In exchange for, I asked. Though I already knew. Drop the lawsuit, Victor said. Sign a non-disclosure agreement. Let the past stay in the past. I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. That's not even close to what grandfather left me. It's more than generous considering you have no legal standing, Vivienne said, her smile never wavering. The will was properly executed and probated 15 years ago. The statute of limitations has long since passed. You're grasping at straws. Dear, this offer is about compassion, not obligation. I leaned back in my chair and really looked at them. My parents. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to protect me and champion me. Instead, they had stolen from me, lied to me, and were now trying to buy my silence with a fraction of what they had taken. You know what the saddest part is, I said quietly. It's not even about the money for me. It's that you never even considered what grandfather wanted. You didn't care about his wishes or his vision or his legacy. You just saw dollar signs and decided you deserved them more than he had decided. Arthur was not in his right mind at the end, Victor said, and it was the first crack in his composure. That will was written under duress, influenced by medication and manipulation. Manipulation, by who I asked. By me, I was 14. By people who wanted to turn him against his own son, Victor said, his voice rising. By lawyers who saw an opportunity. You mean by people who respected his wishes? I countered. By people who understood that integrity matters more than perpetuating the family name. Vivienne's smile finally dropped. You ungrateful little, she stopped herself, took a breath, and the smile returned. But there was poison behind it now. We gave you everything. A home, education, opportunities. And this is how you repay us, by dragging the family name through the mud. You gave me conditional acceptance, I said, standing up. You gave me a place at the table as long as I stayed silent and grateful. The moment I showed that I might be more capable than you wanted me to be, you threw me out. So let's not pretend this is about gratitude or family loyalty. I looked at the folder one more time, then looked at them. I'm not interested in your settlement. I'm interested in what grandfather wanted. What he explicitly stated in his will. The real will. Not the forgery you filed. Julian appeared in the doorway then, and from his expression, he had been listening. Father already handled the lawyer who helped with that, he said, then stopped. Realizing what he had just admitted, the silence that followed was profound. Victor went pale. Vivienne's hand went to her pearl necklace, gripping it like a lifeline. Julian looked confused, not yet understanding that he had just confirmed everything. Thank you, Julian, I said softly. I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording app I had been running since before I sat down. Amelia had taught me well. I think we're done here. I walked out of the lodge, got in my car, and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see Victor standing on the porch, one hand pressed against the pillar as if he needed it to hold him upright. Vivienne was yelling at Julian, her composure finally broken. I called Amelia before I even reached the main road. I have it, I said. I have a confession. Tell me you recorded it. Amelia said, every word. There was a pause. Then, Eleanor, this changes everything. This isn't just a civil case anymore. This is criminal fraud. Possibly conspiracy? Maybe even connected to that lawyer's disappearance. We're not just getting your inheritance back. We're potentially sending people to prison. I thought about that for a moment. About what it meant. About the finality of it. Then I thought about the last 3 years. About my grandfather's voice on that recording saying I had integrity. About Vivienne telling me I was born to follow. Good, I said. File the criminal referral. The next 3 months were a hurricane of legal motions, discovery, and increasingly desperate attempts by the Vance family lawyers to stop what was coming. They filed motions to dismiss, motions to suppress evidence, motions to disqualify Amelia as my attorney. Every single motion was denied. Agnes, despite being in her late 70s and not in the best health, gave a video deposition that was clear and compelling. She described in detail watching my grandfather sign the will in June 2004, described his sound, mind, and clear intentions, described the conversation where he told her that Eleanor was the only one who understood what he had built. David provided not just testimony, but documents that proved a pattern of financial manipulation going back years. The payments to the crooked lawyer, the suspicious timing of property transfers, the restructuring of corporate entities right after my grandfather's death. We found the forensic accountant who had reviewed the records from 2016 and could confirm that I had indeed saved the company with my own money. Money that was never repaid or acknowledged. We found the former employees who remembered me working around the clock, who had been shocked when I was fired, who had wondered what really happened. Every piece of the puzzle clicked into place, building a picture not just of fraud, but of a systematic effort to erase me from my own family legacy. The Vance family fought back with everything they had. Local news outlets ran stories about an unstable woman making wild accusations against her grieving family. Articles portrayed me as bitter, vengeful, possibly mentally ill. Anonymous sources close to the family suggested I had stolen money from the company, that I had forged documents, that I was motivated by pure greed. Friends from my childhood, people I hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly appeared on social media to say what a troublemaker I had always been. My social media accounts were flooded with hateful messages. Someone created a fake profile claiming to be me and posted inflammatory content designed to make me look unhinged. For a while, it worked. I became a pariah in certain circles. Invitation dried up. People I had once considered friends crossed the street to avoid talking to me. There were days when I wanted to quit, when I wanted to take that settlement offer, if it was still on the table, and just disappear, but then I would listen to my grandfather's recording again. Or I would look at the termination papers they had given me 3 years ago. Or I would remember Vivian's smile when she told me I was born to follow, and I would remember why I was doing this. Amelia kept me grounded. They're trying to destroy your credibility because they can't destroy your evidence, she said. Every attack, every lie, every piece of character assassination is just proof that they know they're guilty. Innocent people don't need to run smear campaigns. The turning point came when 3 former Vance Holdings employees came forward independently to testify on my behalf. They described my work during the 2016 crisis in detail. They provided emails, meeting notes, and financial records that proved not only what I had contributed, but also the deliberate effort to erase my contributions from the company's official narrative. Then our forensic accountant confirmed the paper trail of my personal loan to the company, $520,000, transferred in 3 installments. Never repaid. Never even acknowledged in corporate records. The accountant's report went further. It showed how Victor had restructured the company's debt immediately after firing me, taking personal credit for the recovery I had engineered. It showed how Julian had received bonuses based on the improved performance I had created. It showed how Vivienne had continued to draw her generous stipend from company profits that only existed because of my work. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They had stolen my work, my achievements, my literal blood, sweat, and tears, and claimed it as their own. When David's testimony about the recording and documents became public, when the forensic evidence of the forged signature was released, when Agnes's video deposition aired, the narrative began to shift. Suddenly, the wild accusations didn't seem so wild. Suddenly, the grieving family looked more like criminals who had been caught. Victor suffered a minor stroke the day after the evidence went public. The official statement from the family lawyer said it was due to the stress of these baseless accusations, but the court was unmoved. Judge McKinney, who had been assigned to the case, refused to grant the delay. The Vance lawyers requested, "Mr. Vance's health situation is unfortunate," the judge said at a hearing I attended, "but this case has already been delayed for 15 years. We will proceed as scheduled." Julian called me one night. Around 2 in the morning. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. "What do you want?" I asked. "What's your price?" His voice was slurred. "Probably drunk. Everyone has a price. Just tell me what it will take to make this go away." "I've told you what I want," I said, exhausted. "I want what grandfather intended. I want the truth to be acknowledged." "The truth?" Julian laughed bitterly. "Do you know what the truth will do? It will destroy father. It might actually kill him. Mother will lose everything she's worked for. I'll be a joke, the son of a criminal. Our family name will be synonymous with fraud and theft. Is that what you want? Is that worth it to you?" I thought about my answer carefully. "Julian, I didn't create this situation. Father did when he forged that will. Mother did when she supported him. You did when you went along with it and enjoyed the benefits. I'm not destroying the family. I'm revealing what you already destroyed years ago. The difference is that you hid it, and I'm making it visible." "You've become cruel," he said. "No," I said. "I've become honest. There's a difference." He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat in the dark of my apartment, looking out at the city lights, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness. Exactly. Not satisfaction, but a kind of peace. I was doing the right thing. Even though it was hard. Even though it cost me. Even though it hurt. The day before the trial was scheduled to begin, David called me with his voice shaking. "I found something," he said. "I've been going through old case files, and I found notes from the lawyer who helped Victor, the one who disappeared." "What kind of notes?" "A journal entry, dated 2 weeks before he vanished. It describes a meeting with Victor, where Victor explicitly threatened him. It says, and I quote, "VV made clear that if I spoke about the will substitution, there would be consequences for my family." His exact words were that Arthur's death from illness was fortunate and accidents can happen to anyone. Eleanor. This connects intent to action. This proves they didn't just commit fraud. They terrorized the lawyer into compliance and possibly drove him into hiding or worse. I felt cold all over. That's evidence of criminal conspiracy. That's evidence of a lot of things. David agreed. Amelia needs to see this immediately. The journal entry changed everything. What had been a case about inheritance fraud suddenly became a case about potential witness tampering, intimidation, and possibly more. The prosecutor's office opened a formal criminal investigation. FBI agents showed up at the Vance estate with a search warrant. I watched the news coverage from my apartment. Cameras captured agents carrying boxes out of the mansion I had grown up in. Victor looked diminished in his bathrobe. Aged a decade, in just a few months. Vivienne stood frozen on the steps in her pearls. Her signature smile. Nowhere to be found. Julian was caught trying to sneak out a back entrance and was questioned on the lawn for over an hour. The search warrant had been very specific. They were looking for the safe in my grandfather's study. The same study where I had sat at 14 while he told me I had integrity. The safe that I had seen him open 100 times but never knew the combination to, except I did know the combination. Because my grandfather had told me once, years ago, that the most important things in life should be protected by the things you love most. I called Amelia. The safe combination. I said, "It's my birthday. May 14th. 1990. How do you know? Because grandfather told me that he protected what mattered most with dates that mattered most. My birthday mattered to him." Amelia relayed the information to the federal agents. An hour later, they had the safe open. Inside was a treasure trove of evidence. Arthur's personal journal, describing his fears about Victor's intentions and his decision to leave everything to me. Letters between Arthur and the original lawyer, discussing the will and concerns about family pressure. Financial records from the company going back decades, including the year the crooked lawyer disappeared. And, most damning of all, a USB drive that contained digital recordings Arthur had made as a kind of insurance policy. One of those recordings was dated August 2004, 2 weeks before Arthur died. In it, he described a confrontation with Victor about the will. Victor had demanded Arthur change it, had suggested that leaving everything to a teenage girl was irresponsible, had argued that he had earned the right to control the family business. And Arthur, in his quiet, determined way, had refused. "I built this empire with integrity," Arthur's voice said on the recording, thin and weak from his illness but unmistakably clear. "I will not let it be run by someone who values power over principle." Eleanor understands that Victor never will. When that recording played in court, I watched my father's face crumble. It wasn't anger or defiance anymore. It was defeat. It was the face of a man who had been caught not just in a crime, but in a betrayal of his own father's explicitly stated wishes. The trial was supposed to last 3 weeks. It lasted 6 days. The prosecution, working in parallel with our civil case, presented a timeline so clear and damning that even the expensive defense lawyers Victor had hired couldn't create reasonable doubt. They showed the forged signature. They played Arthur's recordings. They presented David's testimony and Agnes's video deposition. They showed the payments to the crooked lawyer, his subsequent disappearance, and the threatening journal entry. They showed how Victor had restructured the company immediately after Arthur's death, erasing any trace of the original succession plan. They proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Victor and Vivienne had knowingly participated in fraud, forgery, and witness intimidation. They proved that Julian, while perhaps not originally part of the conspiracy, had knowingly benefited from it and had attempted to continue it by offering bribes and making threats. On the 5th day of the trial, the Vance family lawyers made one final attempt at a settlement. They offered to acknowledge that some mistakes had been made, to restore some of the inheritance, to make a public apology. In exchange, they wanted all criminal charges dropped. Amelia brought me the offer in the courthouse hallway. "It's your decision," she said. "If you take this, you'll get most of what Arthur wanted you to have, and you'll avoid the spectacle of a complete trial. If you don't, we go all the way, and they face full criminal prosecution." I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "We go all the way." Arthur didn't record all those messages and hide all that evidence so we could settle. He wanted the truth to be known. So that's what we're going to do. The verdict came on day 6. Judge McKinney read it in a voice that carried through the packed courtroom. In the matter of the estate of Arthur Vance, this court finds clear and convincing evidence of fraud, forgery, and undue influence. The will probated in 2004 is hereby declared invalid and null. The handwritten will dated June 14, 2004, is recognized as the true and valid last testament of Arthur Vance. All assets of Vance estates are to be restored to Eleanor Ann Vance as the sole beneficiary, effective immediately. There was more about restitution, about the company's debt, about various legal mechanisms for untangling 15 years of fraudulent ownership. But I barely heard it over the rushing in my ears. I had won. After 3 years of fighting, after all the threats and attacks and character assassination, I had won, but Judge McKinney wasn't done. Furthermore, she continued, the evidence presented in this case reveals criminal conduct that cannot be overlooked. Charges of forgery, fraud, elder abuse, and witness tampering are being referred to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for immediate prosecution. Victor sat motionless at the defense table, staring straight ahead. Vivian was crying, silent tears that ruined her perfectly applied makeup. Julian had his head in his hands. I felt Amelia's hand on my shoulder. Eleanor, she said softly. Arthur would be so proud. I nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't triumph I felt in that moment. It was relief. Relief that the truth had prevailed. Relief that my grandfather's wishes were finally being honored. Relief that I had been vindicated. Not just legally, but morally. As we left the courthouse, Reporter Swamilus, Amelia had prepared a brief statement. Justice has been served today. Not just for Eleanor Vance, but for Arthur Vance, whose final wishes were criminally subverted by the people who should have honored them most. We hope this verdict sends a message that elder abuse and inheritance fraud will not be tolerated, regardless of how wealthy or connected the perpetrators may be. I didn't say anything to the cameras. I didn't need to. The verdict spoke for itself. 3 months after the trial, the criminal sentencing took place. Victor and Vivienne both pleaded no contest to reduce charges in exchange for lesser sentences. Victor received 3 years in prison. Vivienne received 2 years of house arrest and 5 years probation. Julian avoided prison time, but faced significant fines and community service. But the real punishment was what happened to them after. Victor, once a titan of Portland real estate, suffered a severe stroke a month into his sentence. He survived, but with significant paralysis on his left side, he now requires round-the-clock care in a medical facility. Vivienne, the queen of Portland charity boards, was quietly removed from every organization she had been part of. Her house arrest was spent in a modest condo, not the mansion she had once called home, which had been sold to settle debts and legal fees. Her pearls, I heard, were sold at auction. Julian, the golden boy who had never worked a real day in his life, ended up doing construction work in Bend. I heard about it from David, who still lived there. He's framing houses, David told me with a hint of amusement, building other people's homes with his hands. The irony is not lost on anyone. I took possession of the Vance properties 6 months after the verdict. Standing in my grandfather's study at the Crystal Lake Lodge, I found myself drawn to the same spot where the safe had been hidden, the painting had been rehung. But I could still see where the wall had been disturbed during the search. I had brought the letter my grandfather had left me, the one that started everything. I read it one more time, hearing his voice in my head. You are stronger than they ever let you believe. Then I did something I had been planning since the verdict. I went to the stone fireplace in the study. The same fireplace where Arthur had taught me to build a proper fire when I was 8 years old. I struck a match and held it to the letter, watching the paper catch and curl and burn. As the ashes drifted up the chimney, I whispered. They laughed when I walked in, but they weren't laughing when I walked out. With the settlement money, the restored inheritance, and the back pay I was owed from my time saving the company, I had more money than I knew what to do with. I could have lived like Vivienne, collecting art and going to galas. I could have run the real estate empire like Victor, focused solely on profit and expansion. I could have been like Julian, treating it all as an entitlement I never had to earn. Instead, I did what Arthur would have wanted. I established the Eleanor Vance Legal Justice Fund with an initial endowment of $4.6 million. Its mission to provide free legal representation to people fighting inheritance fraud, elder abuse, and family financial manipulation. People who, like me, had been told they were crazy, ungrateful, or vindictive for seeking the truth. The fund's first case was helping a woman in Eugene whose stepchildren had forged her husband's will. The second was assisting an elderly man whose daughter had drained his accounts through a fraudulent power of attorney. The third, fourth, and fifth cases came quickly after that. Turns out, my story wasn't unique. It was disturbingly common. A year after the verdict, I was invited to speak at the University of Oregon School of Law. I stood in front of a lecture hall of eager law students, many of them not much younger than I was, and I told them my story. Not for sympathy or acclaim, but to teach them something important. Integrity builds legacy. I wrote on the board behind me, "Legacy is not given. It is built." I told them about my grandfather, about his values and his vision. I told them about the fraud and the fight to expose it. I told them about the cost of seeking truth and the greater cost of accepting lies. And I told them about the responsibility they would have as lawyers to protect the vulnerable. Even when the perpetrators were powerful, the students listened with an intensity that reminded me why this work mattered. After the lecture, a young woman approached me. "My grandmother is being pressured to change her will by my uncle," she said quietly. "After hearing your story, I think I need to help her document her true wishes before it's too late." "Yes," I said. "You do. And if you need help, call my fund." As more students came up to ask questions, to share their own stories, to express admiration for what I had done, I realized something. This was the legacy Arthur had actually intended. Not buildings or bank accounts, but a commitment to integrity, to truth, to standing up for what's right, even when it costs everything. I still receive letters sometimes, from Victor, mostly, written in the shaky hand of a stroke survivor. They're variations on the same theme: regret, requests for forgiveness, attempts to justify what he did. "I thought I was protecting the family," one letter said. "I thought Arthur wasn't thinking clearly. I thought I deserved it more." I read these letters with compassion, but I don't respond. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't require reconciliation. I can forgive him for being weak, for being greedy, for being threatened by his own daughter's competence, but I don't have to invite him back into my life. Peace exists in boundaries, not in bitterness. Vivienne never writes. I hear about her occasionally through mutual acquaintances. She lives quietly, sees almost no one, and has apparently taken up watercolor painting. I wonder sometimes if she ever thinks about that dinner table conversation when she told me I was born to follow. I wonder if she regrets it, or if she still believes it was true. Julian I've actually spoken to, once. He called me about a year after his sentencing, asking if we could meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop in Bend, not far from where David lived. Julian looked different, thinner, more weathered, with calluses on his hands and a humility in his eyes that had never been there before. We sat in uncomfortable silence for a long moment before he spoke. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What you fought for. Why it mattered. I was so caught up in protecting the family name that I never stopped to think about what the family name was supposed to represent." "And what was it supposed to represent?" I asked. "Integrity," he said quietly. "The thing grandfather valued most. The thing I never bothered to develop because I thought money and connections were enough." We talked for an hour, not about the trial or the verdict or the family drama. About life. About work. About what it means to rebuild yourself when everything you thought you were turns out to be a lie. At the end, he shook my hand. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were always the best of us. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see that." I watched him walk back to his truck, a battered Ford with construction equipment in the bed, and I felt something I didn't expect. Not forgiveness. Note quite. But maybe the beginning of it. The possibility that people can change, that they can learn. That rock bottom sometimes teaches lessons that success never could. I still live in Portland, though not in the mansion where I grew up. I bought a smaller place in the West Hills with a view of the city and mountains. A place that's mine in a way the Vance estate never was. I work for the Legal Justice Fund full-time now, reviewing cases, funding litigation, connecting people with lawyers who will fight for them the way Amelia fought for me. Some days I stand on my deck, looking out at the city Arthur helped build, and I think about legacy. Real legacy. Not the kind that comes from wealth or power or having your name on buildings. The kind that comes from knowing you stood for something that mattered. That you fought for truth, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. That you honored someone's wishes, even when everyone else chose convenience over integrity. I think about the speech I gave to those law students, and the words I wrote on the board: integrity builds legacy. Legacy is not given. It is built. Arthur built a real estate empire. But his real legacy was teaching me that some things matter more than money. That integrity can't be bought or inherited. That the true measure of a person isn't what they accumulate, but what they stand for when standing costs everything. I built something too. Over these past years, not an empire, but something more valuable. I built a life on my own terms. I built relationships based on honesty rather than obligation. I built a fund that helps others fight the same battles I fought. And I built, finally, a sense of peace with myself and my choices. The students in my lectures laugh and ask questions and challenge my assumptions, and that laughter is pure and genuine. Not the artificial politeness that permeated every Vance family gathering. That laughter is my grandfather's true legacy. More than any property or bank account. It's the sound of people engaging with truth, wrestling with justice, and committing to something bigger than themselves. Sometimes I still hear Vivienne's voice in my head: you were born to follow, but it doesn't have power over me anymore. I know the truth now. I wasn't born to follow. I was born to lead, to fight, to build something meaningful. I was born to be Arthur Vance's granddaughter. Not in name, but in spirit. Legacy is not inherited. It is built, and I'm still building mine. One case at a time. One student at a time. One person who needs justice at a time. That's the story of how I went from being erased from my family to reclaiming not just my inheritance but my identity. It's the story of how I learned that sometimes the greatest strength isn't in forgiveness or family loyalty, but in the courage to stand alone for what's right. So let me ask you this: what would you do if your family stole everything from you? Would you have the courage to fight back? Knowing it might cost you everything you had left, would you be willing to stand alone in court? Facing people who once claimed to love you, to demand the truth. Have you ever had to choose between being true to yourself and keeping the peace? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if you faced similar battles with family or felt the sting of being underestimated, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, who needs to know that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. And remember, legacy isn't what's given to you. It's what you build with your own hands, your own integrity, your own courage. Thank you for listening to my story.